Thanks very much, Harm. And thank you to the panel for coming forward. Partnerships is a really interesting topic. So this panel is going to look at exploring how government and industry partnerships can work together, how they can deliver perhaps more accessible, affordable and resilient healthcare, taking into consideration all of the things that we've heard this morning from our various presenters. And panellists will also look at sharing case studies and insights. My name, as you know, is Kate Copeland, and I have the pleasure of being the chair of the Australian Health Design Council and the panel chair for this session. Our panellists are diverse in their backgrounds and experience. So just making sure I've got the right to left. Margo Kyle, General Manager of National Health Facility Planning at Health New Zealand. Georgie Huxley, Vice President Leasing for Northwest Healthcare Properties. And Catherine Loker, Principal from Hassel. And what I'm going to do is get each of them to do a self-introduction because I think that's more relevant than for me to read a bio.
As Kate said, I'm Margo Kyle. I'm the GM for National Health Facility Planning and the GM for Design Advisory and Assurance at Health New Zealand Infrastructure and Investment Group. We are a small but growing infrastructure unit. We are gaining maturity rapidly because a national health system allows us to do that. I have a clinical background. I've been in health for almost 30 years, which I find, I've heard a few people say today, they've been there 30 years. It seems to be a common number. I've only done health, so I probably can't see myself doing anything else. I'm incredibly passionate about health infrastructure and doing better. I think my passion probably drives some of my colleagues crazy at times, but I'm still here. It's my first time to Adelaide, and I'm actually really enjoying myself. I live in Christchurch, and I hear that Christchurch is the sister architectural city of Adelaide. They've been mirrored. So, yeah, that was a fun fact. Anyways, thanks. Pleased to be here.
Hi, everyone. Georgie Huxley. As Kate mentioned, I'm from Northwest Healthcare. For those that don't know, Northwest is a real estate fund, but we focus purely on healthcare, life science and aged care, so we're not a diversified fund. Everyone within our business is very much focused on the health and aged care sector. Across Australia and New Zealand, we're actually the largest specialised real estate fund in this space. We're about $6.5 billion across the region. My role within the business is very much focused on development leasing, so precinct curation, and while it's probably important to note we primarily play in the private space, our partners do extend through to the relevant public sector providers as well. So here in Adelaide, we've got a really good partnership with Narlan and SA Health, and we're doing a lot in the Queensland market as well. Unlike Margo, I haven't been in the space for 30 years, but it's certainly something that I'm very passionate about. And prior to this role, I actually managed the Australian assets for the Vital Healthcare Fund, which is a sort of sub-$2 billion real estate fund.
Thanks, Georgie. Catherine Loker. I'm an architect with Hassel. I primarily work in the New South Wales market in health, and nationally we're delivering across both public and private, so it's really great to be part of the panel. Perhaps the glue between both those sectors, and looking forward to talking about some insights in that.
Thanks very much, folks. So partnerships means different things to different people. It can also have different meanings at a different time or in a different context. We talked when we were planning this session about design partnerships. We talked about government and industry partnerships, collaborative partnerships, public-private partnerships, precincts and private investment in public sector. So the space is wide open. So on that, I'm going to go first of all to Margo. Noting that there's a known health infrastructure deficit in New Zealand, don't think that's going to come as a great surprise to anyone. What approach is New Zealand currently using to address this?
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, you are correct. There is a known large health infrastructure deficit in New Zealand, estimated to be circa 2 million square meters of replacement and 1 million of replacement, and 1 million of additional capacity required in the next coming decades. It's quite significant. And in combination with that, the prices are going up. You know, over the past 10 years, we've seen even 6 years costs increase significantly, and it takes us a long time in New Zealand to, you know, from a business case to go live. So this is obviously is a huge problem, and one that is keeping myself and my colleagues up at night. How do we address this? And actually, we have a strategy, which I'm going to talk about shortly, but I actually don't think we needed a strategy. We could have just brought Angela on board. How we can build faster, cheaper, better quality. But so it's called Building Hospitals Better. And I'm going to explain the strategy briefly, and then I'm going to talk about how the partnerships fall into the strategy. Effectively, Building Hospitals Better, it's a strategy. It's now actually a policy because our minister has endorsed it, and it's available on our external website. And it's some of you might have heard, actually, some of my colleagues talk about it, Blake Lipper, who is developed this with, and some other members of the team. Have spoke about it at other conferences before. It's a 3-pillared approach. So it starts with standardization, which everybody says, oh yeah, standardization. Okay, that's fine. Standardization it's starting at the very beginning. So we wanted to standardize if we don't standardize the inputs, it's going to be really hard to standardize the outputs. So it starts with nationally consistent demand and capacity modeling methodology, so it's equitable, you know. Standardized rooms, use of Oz HFG. And then, a staged approach is the second pillar. So we don't have the market in New Zealand to be able to achieve these big mega builds, actually, and we want to bring on online capacity earlier. A big mega build for us will take us close to a decade. You know, we need to bring that clinical capacity on earlier. So staged developments. And then the third pillar is strategic partnerships. And really, that's about, we can't tackle this 2 million square meter problem over decades by working on a project by project transactional approach anymore. It would just, it's too difficult for us, to be honest, to do that. We want our partners to be incentivized to know that the work is going to keep coming for them. And so instead of thinking about how you're going to win the next bid, I want you to think about how you're going to solve our problems with us. So again, standardization, stage, and strategic partnerships. But the partnership goes right back to the beginning. So for example, the nationally consistent modeling methodology that was developed in partnership, not with industry, but with our my analytical team and the hospital and specialist services developed that together. So we agreed, you know, this is going to be, there's always room for continuous improvement, but that's the first part of the partnership. Then we went to market, and I have an internal health planning team, but it's not enough. We need more, and we need it to be consistent across the country. Like I said, it's going to be really hard to standardize the outputs and endorse promote MMC and those sorts of things if we, and industry, to build their capability and capacity in that space if we don't do something about the inputs. So we've gone to market, we've got a health planning partnership, at the moment for the next few years, and that's working well for us. Then we went to market for design consortia. There's some members of our consortias in this room today. And so again, the modeling, the health planning, design, and then we've just gone to market for a major contractors panel. And I think it's been announced, actually, but if not, it will be in the next couple days. Better not say anything here today. And actually, I can see another one of our partners here in the room today. Dorofis is a part of our strategic partnerships as well. We have a enterprise model, and we expect our projects now to use our enterprise license because we want the data. So I think I've covered I could go on about clinicians and consumers and that sort of thing, but actually there is no way out of this for us without working in partnership
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is working in partnership with industry, planning, design and delivery. Yeah. Georgie or Catherine, any thoughts about that industry partnership approach?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's great to see that thinking in that, you can't necessarily do it alone. And certainly from our perspective, that's where we see opportunity. And we've got existing partnerships across Christchurch and Auckland and Wellington. And I think it's really important to note there are many different ways that private sector can partner with the public sector. So you've got your PPP model, and we heard about the Footscray Hospital earlier. That's not a space that Northwest plays in. So probably important to note, we don't deliver the services. So we're not a hospital or a diagnostics provider. We purely deliver the infrastructure, and we will always partner with someone. So I think partnerships is at the core of what we do as a business. But we have examples where we provide real estate and there's a traditional lease model, or we have a model where our operator will lease the hospital in totality of us, and obviously then they contract work out to yourselves. So I think for us the thinking has shifted over time. There's over prior discussions we've had, there's been resistance to partnering with private sector, but I think that the challenges that the market is facing overall at the moment is really forcing people to rethink what that partnership looks like. And as a provider in that space of the infrastructure and the real estate, you need to be nimble. And I think what you said about listen to what they need. Like, you can't just come with a solution and think that everything is going to fit into that square peg round hole situation. Is very, very difficult, and it's a problematic way to approach a situation. So you need to come in with open ears and actually listen to what the health network needs or what your private operator needs. Otherwise it's going to be difficult for you guys to find a pathway forward.
Yeah, aiming for win-win. Catherine?
Well, I think, part of that is from a designer's perspective, I think having the foresight to see that there may be that flexibility or that need over time between the public and the private partnership, depending on who your particular client might be at the time, and being able to engender into that framework of the master plan that flexibility to allow that to occur over time and to take into account those needs and diversity.
Yeah, thank you. Georgie, moving from a government approach to a private sector approach, can you talk a little bit more about Northwest Properties' approach to partnership?
Yeah, as I mentioned, partnerships is at the core of what we do. We're not necessarily at the coalface of delivering these services to the community and to patients, so we rely really heavily on our partners to do that. And we're very lucky to be partnered with, a lot of the tier 1 private operators in Australia and New Zealand, and in some instances, really, really strong relationships with the public sector as well. I think for us, it is about being nimble. Like, the way that we've conducted our business, particularly over the last 5 years, has shifted dramatically. The landscape was probably a lot easier before, the economy turned and before COVID, and the sector as a whole really wasn't facing a lot of headwinds that we are now. And I think as part of that, for us, it was very much about pivoting the business to make sure that we were supporting operators for what they needed. And a lot of that in the development space, and someone asked a question earlier, is, it looks great from an architectural perspective, but what's your facilities management team saying about that? And, it's important to listen to your internal partners and internal stakeholders as well. I think one of my prior roles within the business came from that side, and, sometimes you're living with challenges, shall I say, that was, a fantastic design decision 10, 15 years ago. But operationally, it's causing some resilience issues for your assets because they're not necessarily built with that sort of 15, 20, 30-year view in mind, which for a hospital, it can be challenging if you're taking that short-term view. So for us, from a partnership perspective, I would say, it's so important to our business. We couldn't do what we do without all of our partners at a grassroots level, and even at that more senior level as well. So at this juncture in the market and the business right now, I think it's just listening to what your operators are saying, and I think there's no sort of shying away from the private operator challenge in HealthScope at the moment, and obviously the market's working through that. But what that means for us is that, focus on where you can add value. And someone touched on ESG before, that's a space that as a business we really pride ourselves on, and being able to educate a lot of our partners along the way in certain aspects of things that maybe they're not necessarily the subject matter experts on, because what they do is, and what they're experts at, is the care delivery part.
Thank you. So Catherine, going to you, having heard from a government and a private sector perspective, what insights would you offer regarding the power of partnerships?
Well, I'd suggest there are threefold. It's really unlocking the true value particularly for the private commercial clients from a financial perspective. I think operationally, from a public perspective, offering that partnership and that flexibility in terms of the delivery model, which requires clear governance and agreement at the beginning of the design of the project. And I think also from a community perspective, allowing that partnership with communities. So for example, in terms of the financial offerings, I suppose, and leveraging that value, projects that certainly we have worked on, like Murdoch recently, and the sale of some of the consulting suites have been quite high. Hurston Quarter, I think the STARS leveraged quite a good model for AU. And then when it comes to community assets, PD New South Wales have partnered with Vale on the Manly Hospital site, and that's been quite important in terms of the partnership, which is not necessarily about the built form. It's actually about opening up a site that's really important for community and allowing the development to be completely seen as part of community. And that's been quite a success story for Aveo, even though they're clearly got their own financial model and need to make money on the side. But that's quite an important part of that partnership, listening to the community and having those pillars brought into the project as part of the design.
Thank you. Margo, any comments from you on Catherine's statements?
I think you've covered it pretty well, to be honest, Catherine. I don't know if I'm going to add any value. Yeah, thank you.
Georgie?
I think that also, like, the way and shape and the governance of your partnership will change over time. It's probably naive to think that what works now or what worked 5 years ago or even 12 months ago is going to continue on into the future. So there's a really good example here in Adelaide, actually, a project that we're involved in the north of Adelaide, where a precinct partnership was established, and it probably didn't follow the traditional pathway of what that looks like in terms of a government-run process, but it was a group of 18 or 20 initial founders that was, representation from the public sector across NALHN, so Northern Adelaide Local Health Network, SA Health, Department of Wellbeing, ACH, which is an aged care provider, Calvary, who are our not-for-profit partner on that development site, and a range of sort of smaller organisations, even all the way through to council. And what that looked like, even 24 months ago versus what that looks like now is very different. There is a lot of opportunity out in the north there to affect change. It's a low socioeconomic area. The partnership does sort of centre around the Lama McEwen Hospital, which, if you're from Adelaide, you'd be familiar. That's like one of the lowest socioeconomic catchments in Adelaide. But I think, for us there and our involvement, it was really about sort of pivoting and being able to move with what that partnership needed over time, and also understanding that the drivers of a small organisation as part of that is very different to, obviously, the drivers for, say, council, who are very focused on, economic outputs and benefits, versus what, a smaller, or like someone like ACH, who are on the ground delivering care and have that more sort of proximal focus wanted out of that partnership.
Yeah, it's an interesting balancing act, isn't it? Going into a partnership with enough information to all know what you're heading for, but still having enough flexibility to be able to adapt over time, depending on circumstance.
Yeah, and I will say that, there were sort of 18 to 20 founding members, and I think sort of upwards of almost 30 sort of peripheral or non-financially contributing members. And that is a big group of people to get on the same page. And in some instances, you do have organisations that outside of this partnership are actually competitors. And how do you manage that when people are coming to this partnership, as they've still got their day jobs, and ultimately their employers are remunerating them for their time, and this is something that they're doing as part of their broader remit, but how you manage that as well. And I think, you've got to appreciate that when you approach these situations.
I invented a term a while back called co-opetition, which is organisations that are in some degree of competition with each other but are actually cooperating together. So you can use that one if you like.
Kate, I might add to that, it's not only just the private-public partnership that occurs in, it's often government to government and state to state. And sometimes those partnerships, you need leadership within the groups to be able to be seeking the right goal. And then within that also the executive that's with the health district who hopefully will have some level of vision that can withstand a lot of the bumps on the road. And, you know, I'm thinking of the only cross-border health service in Australia when I talk about that.
Okay, that's another topic for another day. So, Margo, you've mentioned the strategy Building Hospitals Better. How does the New Zealand Health Infrastructure Plan fit within that, and what role does it play in guiding Health New Zealand's investment and redevelopment priorities across the country?
I probably should have spoke about the Health Infrastructure Plan first and then Building Hospitals Better second, actually. Building Hospitals Better is the how and the Health Infrastructure Plan is the what. Health New Zealand released its first Health Infrastructure Capital Plan, what was published last year. Last year was year one of the 10-year plan. And effectively, the allows us to plan for a pipeline of work, actually. And when potentially public-private partnerships as well. But it allows us to plan not just for the delivery of that work, but also all the health planning that needs to go into the front end and all the artifacts that need to go into that. But in terms of partnerships, what this allows us to do is actually, it sort of unlocks that ability to partner long-term for us. So yeah, it's an enabler, really, for a pipeline of partnerships. That was bad.
Okay. Georgie, what do you think makes for a strong public-private partnership, and what is needed for them to succeed? So in that, are there any key ingredients that allow for true long-term collaboration?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I don't think that every partnership or as you approach every relationship in life, like no two are ever really the same. And how we deal with SA Health and, you know, some of the local health networks here may be different to because they have different drivers or what have you to, you know, how we deal with Queensland Health or New South Wales. So I think, you know, if you're trying to approach that to build those relationships and forge those partnerships, you have to be very nimble, particularly in the current market. And sometimes, you know, obviously the political sphere and influence of each particular state or its nuance to, you know, the region that you're dealing with is something that you do have to consider as well. And ultimately, if you go into it with, well, this is our experience, without trying to force them down a particular path. And that's challenging because, you know, for us, we're a real estate fund. We have investors. Investors want returns. They want to put their money somewhere that it's going to generate a profit for them. And you might think that you have the best solution, but for whatever reason, that health network or the private operator doesn't necessarily see that that has alignment with what they're doing. So I think for a partnership to succeed, you have to be prepared to listen to them. And in this space particularly, you have to take a long-term view. And I think that's something that our investors agree with. They understand, you know, health is, and, you know, certainly that's reflected over our portfolio. A lot of our leases or partnerships are 20 plus year commitments. It's not, you know, a 2 or 3 year solution and then you exit. And that's reflected in the relationships and the partnerships we've been able to build in the market as well. So, you know, I think it's very challenging in health to expect that you can deliver a site and then exit in 5 years and make this huge profit. Like, it just doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And if that's, you know, what you're thinking about getting into, this is maybe not the right sector for you. And even, like, you know, some of the gestation periods or the scale, like we saw on Angela's projects, like, you don't deliver a 300,000 square metre asset overnight. So you have to think long term. And I think the challenge with some of those bigger scale developments as well is, you know, to retrofit or to address challenges on those is not a quick fix as well. So you do really have to spend the time and invest that resource at the front end. And a lot of that comes also back to your governance structure as well, and having the right governance structure, having the right people at the table, people who can make decision influence. Because as we know, a lot of the time, time does prove challenging on transactions or projects and deals, and can often be one of the pivotal factors in pushing something from something that could get off the ground to sometimes killing the deal.
Thank you. Catherine, from your experience?
Well, location. I think any of the designers in the room would know that, the proximity and association between, a public entity and a hospital and or a private hospital is kind of key in that relationship. And then you might hit the jackpot and have both. Murdoch has that. They've got Fiona Stanley on one side, St John have gone on the other side, which enabled Hesperia to be able to develop over a staged period of time. Gold Coast University Hospital, which I know that Norwest Real Estate are investing in terms of the association there with our main hospital. Even, in the city in Sydney, the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse and its relationship with RPA. So those are kind of significant key issues in terms of planning out a master planning, and then you just overlay that with all of the accessibility and transport issues that are associated with that. That then allows you to include diversity in terms of the operational and, I suppose, the use mix, and then that just adds to the capacity to be able to encourage people to use it as a precinct beyond what may be its original intention of being a health precinct.
Yeah. You say location. My catch cry always used to be communication. Margo, any comments you'd like to make on that one?
I think, New Zealand's in a bit of a different space at the moment. We're not seeing that. We don't have, I can think of one campus that has a shared public-private arrangement, but, we're not seeing the example you gave of Fiona Stanley and whatnot. I think we do need to change. We can't keep doing what we've been doing, but but it's not quite comparable at the moment. Yeah, the bar is a little bit lower, but this government is very open.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting remark, Catherine. It's absolutely what we're seeing in terms of where we're investing in greenfield sites. So all of our developments at the moment in our pipeline, which is sort of the next 5 years or so, are either co-located with the existing public hospitals or future public hospitals. So we're doing something up at Coomera. I don't know if there's people here from Queensland Health, so that's a significant infrastructure investment there. As Catherine mentioned, we're involved in the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct, and I think that's a good example of a partnership that extends beyond that physical realm. So we had purchased a block of land. We're about to hit PC on a sort of 15,000 square metre development there. There's a private hospital in that precinct operated by Healthscope, and while we don't have any involvement in that particular hospital, Healthscope are a large partner of ours. We own 11 of their assets nationally, and so rather than coming in and trying to cannibalise their business, we spoke to the partners in that precinct and the stakeholders and identified, what was missing from the amenity, from the infrastructure here, and it was not to deliver more health services. They actually really wanted to lean into innovation and research, and so the facility that we're delivering there is a lab-enabled building that very much focuses on trying to attract research institutes and groups that need support. So we've got a startup operator coming in. So yeah, really trying to look at that partnership piece broader than just the immediate proximity as well.
Yeah, and Georgie's mentioned the timeframes, and I just want to make a comment because I was actually involved with the Gold Coast project in 2006. So the Gold Coast Hospital redevelopment was announced in 2006, and in 2007 we started the planning for the Health and Knowledge Precinct, and it's now really coming to fruition. But seriously, guys, that's 20 years. So it don't think it's overnight. It never is overnight.
And it probably has another 20 years to go. Economic Development Queensland, who controls the land in that precinct, has still got several lots for sale. I think what they've done really well there is the precinct curation piece. So in order for anyone to acquire land there, you have to come to the government with like quite a fully fledged development submission around what you're going to do. You can't just be whacking up an apartment building, and I mean, I'm sure they could sell that land 10 times over in the Gold Coast with the housing crisis that they're facing there. But it is very prescriptive around what you can do, and they're very focused on that partnership piece as well. So it's nice to be able to work with the government organisation that's very focused on that.
I was going to say it's not too late for New Zealand. Then I think we will see the tide is turning. There are this government is very open to delivering health infrastructure differently, and I think we will see in the coming probably 2 years a tipping point.
Oh, good. We'll look forward to that. 2027
Got some
conference
development
presentation.
sites I've got to pitch to Margo. So.
What do you mean?
Got some development sites we've got to pitch to her after this.
Yeah. Okay, I think that leads nicely into my next question. So how can early and meaningful collaboration between parties influence all factors of the partnership, from design, functionality, user experience, patient outcomes? Catherine, do you want to start with that one?
Well, do it really, really early. I mean, you talk about timeframes. Hurston was, I think, 10 years in the making. And that started with early investigations around master plan. I think there's a current project in New South Wales that many in the room would know about, Wollongong, and that's had some early work around the master plan. I think that I would encourage anyone in government to continue to look into that from a master planning perspective and not leap straight into building, because I think that there's a lot to be said around making that precinct work in terms of partnerships as well.
Thank you. George? Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest challenges we keep hearing from our partners, i.e. our operator partners, is the workforce piece. And obviously how that flows into the clinical models. And I think from our perspective, how we need to address that is how can we make them an employer of choice, and the delivery of our assets and how, and I mean, Footscray seems like a really good example of that. There's so many soft services there. The retail piece, the amenity, the childcare, the gym, the wellness aspect. Like, I think to influence that clinical space, you also have to be able to attract the talent, and location, in my eyes, also speaks to the talent piece. Like, we don't have hospitals without clinicians and nursing staff.
Yeah, so you're talking about providing amenity to the people who have to work there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Car parks and childcare. Two of the very important things.
You can have the best care, but if you've got no car parks, it's the only thing you'll hear about.
Yeah. Although I have a colleague who tells me that, we're all going to have, independent vehicles and nobody's going to own a car in 10 years' time. I'm just still waiting to see it. Okay, from each of your perspectives, are there any lessons learned from the things that you've already done with partnerships, or key advice on how to approach partnerships?
How long's a piece of string? Look, I think that, as I said, you've really got to approach every relationship differently. So I would say that if you found that something's worked somewhere, it might not necessarily work somewhere else, and that doesn't mean it's a failure. It just means that you have to adapt to the situation that's in front of you. I think we see a lot of opportunity at the moment. Obviously, Queensland have announced the hospital rescue package, and there's been a lot of work around that. For us, trying to tap into broadening our public sector relationships is, as a business, something that we're very focused on, and whether that's directly or indirectly through our operator partners. So I think we see that as a big opportunity, and I guess a lesson for us was that, maybe in some instances previously where we were quite siloed in our approach across different relationships at different levels of government and then down all the way through to the health service itself, we're now taking a much broader view on that.
Thank you. Catherine?
I think they're slightly different between public and private. I think what we tend to see is that we're offering more flexibility in private because of that changing in the market and being able to adapt in a built form to various different kinds of operational offerings. Government still, it's a little bit about less risk, really, even now. I think for us, looking for what's happening next in the market is the best way to leverage that sort of partnership model and unlocking the value for new relationships, you know, residential coupled with mental health, for example, and how that integration of health and a lot of those pressure points around key worker accommodation and what that means for enlivening precincts and those relationships between the various built forms, I think is something that we would be focusing on now to try to see what's next.
Absolutely.
I think in New Zealand, or Health New Zealand, and previous to the formation of Health New Zealand District Health Board days, District Health Boards or Health New Zealand haven't been a good client. You know, we haven't been. That's the reality. And I think the approach that we're taking now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to be a better client. And your comment, Catherine, that you just had about the market, you know, we do have the health infrastructure plan, and what we need to do is continue to deliver on what we said we were going to deliver on. Yeah, maybe in a couple of years' time, I'm hoping I'll be able to come back and report on our experience and, you know, trying to move away from a transactional project by project based approach, trying to work in programs, trying to work in partnership, trying to not, you know, having to reinvent the wheel with every single project. It's wearing it thin. So we're pretty, pretty new. This is, I want to say first cab off the rank, but we're clearly not. And yeah, we'll see if we can embed this and get it to become BAU, become a better client, strengthen those partnerships, and actually deliver what Angela said everybody's trying to do, and we are too, which is faster, more affordable quality health infrastructure.
Absolutely. So,
sorry, Kate, I just wanted to add one thing. I think, you know, important for all of us in this room, obviously, you know, as players in this space, don't be afraid to advocate for your clients or your partners' needs internally. So, you know, we had a site, it's a multi-stage development. We build private hospitals and aged care. That's what we have always done. And we actually had to start and kick off that development by building a car park. And that was not what we initially, you know, had purchased that site for, and certainly raised a lot of eyebrows internally for us. But as the immediate project team, that was the best pathway to move forward with that development. And we've now subsequently delivered, you know, a sub sort of 10,000 square metre outpatient facility that's now attached to this car park. But you know, when everyone said when we said we've got to build a car park, a 500 space car park, and that's all we're building, and we did that off the back of a pre-commitment from the government, but everyone thought we were mad. But you got to push that discussion internally to get to potentially the long-term outcome. So don't be afraid to push boundaries internally, because if you're the one at the coalface looking at what this opportunity is, you probably know more about it than some of the other people that you're trying to get the funding off.
yes, we won't talk about that.
Go, folks.
So do you think the way that we approach partnerships will continue to evolve and change into the future? Do you think we've got it right now, or...?
Well, what works right now might not work in the future. And I think just you've got to be nimble, you've got to be prepared to adapt, and you can't continue to apply the same methodology to every single situation. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're all humans as well, and you've got to be able to go with the flow in some situations. So yeah, I think, you know, as a business, our approach to partnerships is very much that, like, we come to the table with an ability or a willingness to share and be open and try and, you know, see how we can add value, but also listen to what they're trying to say. I don't think that approach should change, but potentially the way you actually interact with the market and with your partners could change. Their needs could change. They might need X from you one day and Y from you the next day. And I think if you want to be in a position where you can transact in the market and help to deliver, like, you have to be prepared to be able to move with that.
Thank you. Catherine?
Oh, I don't know, call me cynical. We've talked a lot about things being repeated in health that everyone's been talking about for a long time, and then still trying to unlock the same things. It's a complex system, and there are so many moving parts, and oftentimes the real issues are actually nothing to do with design. It's actually to do with the workforce that you've spoken about, our approach to health and wellness. I live in hope, and I think the best thing is everybody wants a good relationship, whether it's in business or in your private life. So you want to really be open, stay open to good ideas, and everybody wants to go in the same direction for the best outcome. So it's all about that vision, I think.
Yeah. I think the key to me is that working with partners, you can create more than the sum of the parts. So that's my final word. On that note, we do have some time now for questions. So I don't know if we have a travelling mic again. Excellent. We've got a few hands up already. No, we'll just pass it over.
Thanks, Kate, and the panel. It's a great discussion. I think what came out of it for me is obviously the broad range of partnerships, and I think often when we're talking to government have a fixed view as to what a partnership looks like. I think we all recognise the value of partnerships, and exactly as you've all said, that we need the public sector can't deliver it all on its own, but we get, dare I say it, politics in the way. You get a change of government. We've seen it in Queensland where the health minister's now stood up publicly and said, we can't do it all on our own. We need partners, which is very refreshing to hear. So I suppose as an industry body, how do we continue to advocate and agitate to government that partnerships are not just one type of partnership, that it's not just, say, a PPP or whatever it is, that actually there's a broad range of partnerships. They're all capable of delivering value regardless of what political colour you have.
Well, I'll start the response by saying I think that's one of the purposes of having conferences like this, where you bring people from a wide range of backgrounds together to discuss issues. But I'm not sure that the Australian Health Design Council was actually set up and doesn't intend to be lobbying government. So it's more about sharing information so that people are informed. And I think the term Angela used earlier was evidence-informed decision-making. So this is a contributor to that. Would anyone else like to comment on Roger's question?
Yeah, it's something that we face every day, to be honest, as part of what we do. And Queensland's a really good example of that. The government came up with a framework around how private developers particularly could partner with them, and there's a portal and you submit, and it's does have quite prescriptive sort of guidelines to it. But I think outside of that, it's something that us and our private operator partners are doing on a daily basis. You've got to have relationships at all levels of government, I think, to affect that change. Like, it doesn't just work from top down, and it doesn't just work from the bottom up either, because sometimes, at senior levels of government, they might have a view of how something gets done, but then at the user group, there's complete misalignment there. So, it's not something that happens easily, but you've just got to keep pushing. And sometimes you don't get the answer that you want, the door closes in your face, and you've got to pivot and try somewhere else. And, it can be quite tiresome sometimes to continually push for that. But look, I think one of the good things, if I can say that came off the back of COVID is there was such a strong recognition from government that the public sector can't stand on its own, because they handed out the private sector rescue packages where they essentially funded their operating costs. And I think that was a really strong message to say that, we see you and we know the importance of what you do in this space. I think there's just a lot of challenges facing us as a sector overall, which is private and public at the moment. And some of that can be, we see opportunity for some of that to be resolved through better partnering, even if it's just at that sort of clinical and contract level space. But I think, as I mentioned, this big question mark around health scope at the moment, certainly from a private perspective, is putting a lot of pressure on the market.
I think Queensland's probably a hard one because the plan is already really a large degree of the plan is already in place, and that's still project by project, quite transactional. It's not a program of work, and I don't know how, without having a program of work or without having long-term partners, I don't understand, grouping projects together, into a program. I mean, not like a pipeline program, but it's going to be difficult it's difficult for the government to then support industry to build their own capability and capacity without that guarantee. Yeah.
That's a whole nother topic we can talk about as well. Now, there was another question down the back, and then there's a hand up the front.
Yeah, thanks. I guess today I'm hearing a lot of success stories around partnerships and PPPs in healthcare. I put my hand up as the New South Welshman and saying we've got a long history of having quite unsuccessful PPPs in the health space, with the taxpayer currently footing a fairly big bill to take back a private hospital.
Don't forget Latrobe.
At the moment, and Port Macquarie and a lot of others in the past of New South Wales as well. I guess my question is, what is New South Wales doing that is meaning it's unsuccessful when we're seeing success across all the other states, and what do we need to do differently as a health organisation? It's probably a huge question, but if you have a personal opinion, it would be interesting to
personal
hear.
view. I think, well, I've taken private groups around public hospitals. They can't believe how much money is spent for the delivery of what is delivered and how much more effectively they seem to think that they're able to do it. And I think that there's a significant difference between a commercial entity is much more streamlined in the way it processes, the way it goes about delivering, because there's a much more, I suppose, a sharper commercial edge to that. But having said that, there is something, great about the way that the public sector goes about its level of consultation, particularly with community and the kind of outcomes that you can get around that if those people who are in control of the purse strings listen to that. So the best outcome would be a balance around that. And you talk about PPPs, I mean, that's a particular kind of delivery model. And I think now New South Wales is quite gun-shy around that. But there are other partnership models within the development of a precinct from a capital infrastructure delivery that is different to that, where you can separate out those models and still leverage the operational efficiencies with the delivery of separate capital over time. It just takes a level of understanding of the master plan and what's going to enable that framework to come to fruition, but still maintain that flexibility, I think. Does that answer your question?
Thanks, great conversation. It's rather a comment than a question, but I'm really happy to hear from anyone who has some insights, even panelists or from the audience. So I think as well another form of partnership that we haven't addressed is the partnership between primary and tertiary care. And I think the main challenge is the funding models that we have, that is, the state funding and the federal funding, which doesn't really support a better integration and partnerships between primary and tertiary. So again, that's more of a comment, but I'm really, I'd be really keen to hear from anyone who has anything to add on this.
46 years in the public health sector.
I don't think it's getting any better. I'm going to be free and frank. I actually think it's getting worse. I think clinical services planning and the quality of it has deteriorated significantly since COVID. There are workforce issues on both sides of it, and funding pressures, and it's becoming I don't think it's getting better. I think it's getting worse. And we used to have a high level of integration in New Zealand because it wasn't coming from separate funding, but it's just becoming incredibly, the workforce shortages and the funding shortages, are just putting pressure on both sides. So I wish I had a crystal ball and I could predict the outcome of this, but at the moment it's putting a lot of pressure on our hospitals.
Yeah, and in my experience, personal comment, in Queensland, the lack of federal investment in primary care, the GP sector and associated, is meaning that hospitals are having to complement a lack of services by providing primary health care. And increasingly in our country areas, the state government is the primary care provider of last resort because there is no one else to provide it. So I'd agree with Margo. I don't think it's getting any better. Not sure it's getting worse, but I don't think it's getting any better. And on that note, guys, I'm going to have to wrap up, or otherwise I'll get a stern word from Alison. So I would like you to join me in thanking our panellists for this session. And on behalf of HARM and the session more generally, again, I'd like to thank Angela for her very rapid but very interesting presentation, Ben for his industry brief, and all of our panellists. So thank you all very much. You now have time for a quick afternoon tea break. Please visit our Partner Showcase exhibition, and we will be back at 3:45 for the next session.